If I were to describe a durian to someone who never had one, I will say that a durian is like an avocado that is much better in every aspect. This description may be highly subjective, but at least I will know where to start the conversation. When it comes to a star apple fruit, I think there is really nothing like it. In Canada, where I am located, this tropical fruit is one of the most difficult to find in specialized grocery stores, mainly due to the fact that it does not ship well. Even outside of Canada, I think most people in colder climates have never heard of this wonderful fruit, let alone attempted to grow it in a pot. But while this video is mostly for the star apple enthusiast, it can also be of interest to owners of other product trees, as I will address a seldom discussed issue that, over time, can kill your trees. This was my star apple tree last spring. It has always looked sick in spring because of the scale insects that start to proliferate at the end of the winter in my garage before I bring the tree outside. I always had to intervene to control the scale infestation and give my tree a fighting chance. But last spring, my tree looked the most unhealthy I had ever seen it. One after another, the leaves turned yellow. Some of them started to fall off. This was probably no longer a scale infestation issue, as yellow leaves are often a symptom of chlorosis. Overwatering or underwatering can lead to chlorosis, but I was pretty sure I did a decent job with the watering during the winter indoors, so my best guess was some sort of nutrient deficiency. However, instead of just fertilizing my tree and adopting a wait-and-see stand, I thought the urgency of the situation warranted a more thorough approach, while my tree was still showing signs of vigor with some new growth. Another hint that I needed to do something more drastic was that my tree was possibly also root-bound, but I wanted to keep it in the same pot since its trunk was still too thin. All this meant that I had to do some root pruning. So first, I started with a heavy pruning of the canopy in order for the future smaller root system to be able to sustain the tree. I mainly pruned the branches at locations where new buds were forming. Pruning is also a good way to get rid of a bunch of scale insects in one single cut. I also got rid of smaller branches to improve airflow and limit the development of mold on leaves covered with honeydew produced by the scale insects. While at it, I also rebalanced the shape of the tree by shortening branches that grew faster than the rest. Finally, I got rid of the most unhealthy looking leaves. This again improves airflow and ensures the remaining leaves all have access to sunlight. Most of these leaves developed while the tree was in my garage under low light conditions, so they were relatively big. On some branches, they were covering each other's. These are the locations most preferred by scale insects. Next, I removed the layer of rock dust I applied as a barrier against fungus gnats. Then, before attempting to remove the tree from the pot, I cut all the roots at the bottom. The root ball was still pretty stuck in my homemade air pruning pot, so I used the blade of a hacksaw to detach it. After unpotting the tree, my first impression was that it did not seem to be root-bound. But I nevertheless wanted to get a better picture of the situation. At this point, it occurred to me that my tree could have a girdling root issue. I had uprooted it once after getting it, but I had never performed a root pruning on it. This is a grafted tree. Most people probably know that with grafted trees, it is important to keep the graft union above soil level, so to make sure the characteristics of the rootstock, such as dwarfing or disease resistance, are transmitted to the grafted scion above. If the scion takes root because the graft union is buried underground, the rootstock characteristics can be altered or lost. But another equally important point is to make sure the root flare of the tree is kept above soil level. If the root flare is buried, roots can grow around the tree and slowly disrupt the flow of water and nutrients from the root system to the canopy. Notice how some roots started to grow between the graft union and the root flare. Those roots were woody, tough, and tightly wrapped around the root flare. I had to resort to a nail clipper to cut them like the branches above. Although the girdling was not extreme, I believe it further weakened my root-bound potted tree in winter. Weakened plants are less able to fight pests such as scales. I'm not sure why the root flare of my potted star apple tree was so low. My advice would be to always check when you get trees from nurseries. Also, some people like to fertilize their trees by applying compost or new topsoil around the trees. If this is done too close to the trunk, over time the root flare can eventually get buried. This is more a concern for trees planted in the ground, but this mistake can also be made with potted trees, for example during potting at home or at the nursery. Notice the high density of the roots at the bottom. Star apple trees have a shallow but expansive root system. It is not uncommon for the roots to go beyond the radius of the tree's canopy. In a pot, their roots grow aggressively in search of water, in the cup below the pot or just below the soil surface. Since I did a pretty aggressive pruning of the canopy, I decided to do an equally aggressive pruning of the root ball. This is what the tree looked like just after repotting with new soil in May outside. The root flare was all cleared up and the tree stood higher in the pot, allowing more room for the roots at the bottom of the same pot. The base of the tree almost has a bonsai look to it, which is not unpleasant to the eye for a potted tree. Unfortunately, a sharp cold snap hit right at the end of the month. All the new buds died, and the leaves dropped one by one. I really thought my tree was dead, but one green leaf was still hanging. My tree stayed like this for more than a month, but it eventually pushed out new buds in July. It was soon covered with new growth. Since I left it in full sun, the leaves were much smaller, but they all looked very healthy. The scales are gone, for now. They might come back next winter, and it will be interesting to see how the tree handles them after this heavy root pruning. For updates, hit the like and subscribe buttons now, and don't forget to activate notifications.